The next award is the Relevance Award, and we're presenting this award to somebody who I really admire, not only because of her work, but because Ms. Jumana Musa, who is an excellent advocate, also tells it how it is. There are many times where if we're facing an issue or I have a question about something and need some clarification, give her a call. She'll tell you exactly what you're doing wrong and what needs to be done. And in our line of work, that's needed because I do live by the motto of there's two people in a room that agree with each other, one of them shouldn't be there. And we need to hear the things that make us better. We need to hear the things that empower us, and at the same time, we need to use our skill sets to help those, not only within the community, but as I said at the beginning, all communities and all communities of color and persons of color. This is a battle for all of us. And I'm going to call up Mr. Greg Nojim, who was last year's award winner from the Center for Democracy and Technology, and Mr. Jamal Al-Hind to present the award. And Greg will talk a little bit more about the award, and then we'll introduce Jumana. Thank you.
Thank you. Now this is going to be a pleasure. I get to say a few words about the significance of this award, and then a few words about why my friend and colleague Jumana Musa is such a deserving recipient. Ralph Johns, the Syrian-American after whom this award is named, was an unsung hero of the civil rights movement. He was a passionate, courageous activist who fought segregation when few non-blacks in the South, in North Carolina, would do that. He even placed signs on the windows of his clothing store that read, "God hates segregation." One of his biggest contributions was to help instigate the Greensboro sit-ins at the lunch counter of the Woolworth's Five and Dime. That earned him more than 25 bomb threats, repeated beatings, and a storefront defaced with racial slurs. He stood for the rights of others. Ralph Johns was all about courage, all about conviction, all about standing up for what is right. So too is Jumana Musa, this year's recipient of the award. Her commitment to civil rights has taken her to positions with Amnesty International. She was one of the first human rights attorneys to observe the military commission hearings down at Guantanamo Bay. She also worked at the Rights Working Group, where she was a campaigner against racial profiling. And her most recent incarnation as a fighter for the rights of the accused at the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. Accused people, refugees, and immigrants. Jumana's devoted her life to helping other people. I've had the privilege of working in coalition with Jumana. As one of her colleagues told me just yesterday, she keeps you pure. She keeps you honest. She keeps you from compromising your beliefs. I saw this. And I might add, she does it with spirit, with humor. She makes you feel good about doing good. Jumana's made many sacrifices, as has her family. To her husband, Jason, thank you for lending Jumana to the cause. There's so much more to say about Jumana. One person can't say it all. Jamal Al-Hindi, family to me and family friend to Jumana, will add a few words.
My parents and Jumana's parents are very close friends. In fact, they were neighbors in the Syracuse area for many years. But because I'm more than 10 years older than Jumana and was already out of my parents' house when her parents built one near them, I did not know Jumana in Syracuse. It wasn't until she came to DC, where I was already working, that I got to see and appreciate the wonderful person she is and to follow and marvel at her career and her commitment. There are occasions now where we bump into each other while rushing around downtown in our busy workdays. We greet each other, we hug, we look into each other's eyes to confirm that we and our parents are doing okay, and that's all there's time for. We move on. But what Jumana may not know is that every time that happens, I walk away uplifted. I go to whatever meeting I have thinking about how happy and proud I am that Jumana is going off to do the work that she does. One thing that I've observed about Jumana is that even in the darkest days or what seem to be hopeless situations, she is someone we can count on to keep a positive spark alive and to nurture it. She's someone who is reverent of the past, but who courageously moves forward. She's someone who recognizes that sometimes the best way to pull things together and to be mindful of the blessings that we have is to share a meal. And this is something that I know she gets from her parents, Dr. Abed and Sultana Musa, who make the best falafel ever. And Dr. and Mrs. Musa, thank you for bringing Jumana into the world and supporting and encouraging and respecting her work. In our community, it's incredibly important for parents to instill in their children a passion to make the world a better place, which you have clearly done. Thank you and congratulations to you and to Jumana.
Wow, that introduction is a lot of pressure. Thank you. This is, we actually all grew up in Syracuse, Greg too. And so, I guess when you're together in that kind of cold, the bonds grow stronger. Before I talk about anything, including this award, I just wanted to quickly point out my family who's here, which is my husband Jason, who's already been pointing at, my son Jimmy, who's waving at me, my son Jaleel, who's sitting quietly, thankfully, my sister Tina. My sister is from another Mr. Pabitra, Muna, and Nura, but most importantly, my parents, Sultana and Abba Musa, please stand up for me. So, what Jamal said is true. I certainly wouldn't be here if not for them, and not just in the physical sense. They've supported me in following my passions and doing what I cared to do. And today, and so if you'll indulge me with a round of applause for them, is their 50th wedding anniversary. It's a bigger accomplishment than any of this. So it is overwhelming to be honored by your colleagues and by your community. It's not something that one often gets in life, to be recognized for what they do on a daily basis. And I think even everybody knows me knows I've been a little overwhelmed by it because I'm not one who does recognition well. But I almost feel like everybody set this up for me, so it's quite lovely. I mean, I think I got introduced by, Jamal, whose parents are like my other parents. Greg, who, if anyone knows him in this field, knows that he's not just incredibly strategic and very smart about issues, but the most generous colleague you could have, the kind of person who will say, hey, you might want to look out for this issue. You should be talking to this person. Let me make an introduction. Let me bring you into the fold. Let me explain to you why this is important. Let me give you my time, even though I'm already handling, a half a dozen or more other things. And so Greg, over the years, has been incredibly instrumental for me in terms of figuring out how to navigate, this advocacy world in DC. Especially when I was growing up, there was not a ton of Arab American lawyers, and so not a lot of people to look to. ADC is actually how I found some of those lawyers. I, now 20-some years ago, when I was in college, got a Chapter Activism Award from ADC, and some of the first lawyers that I ever knew, Arab American lawyers that I knew, were through ADC. And I had brought them to my campus to speak. And, it definitely left a strong impression with me. I also want to say a word about Mr. Wade Henderson, who I know they're going to be talking about quite a bit in just a moment. But one of the things about doing the work I do is I've had the privilege to work with some really incredible people, and Wade Henderson is one of them. If you've ever been to the Leadership Conference office and you look at the walls, you will see pictures of Wade standing up for every kind of rights imaginable. Disability rights, women's rights, civil rights, workers' rights, pick a rights. And Wade has been there. And he has, for many years now, led this enormous coalition, very diverse coalition of people that brings all these issues together around the table and pushes them forward. And it's not a surprise that some of the best advocates and organizers have come out of the Leadership Conference. And one that I want to recognize, who's no longer with us, is Han Montoya. She is someone that I had the honor of working with closely. She was an organizer. She was an incredible person. We lost her tragically last year, but I'm going to tell you some things that I learned from Kathy. One thing I can tell you about Kathy is she always organized for people, not for events, not for campaigns. She organized for people and to get outcomes for people. She, very much like Wade, was always the politics of and. She never learned about a new issue and said, well, I have to do this or this. She was all about the politics of and her heart was big enough to carry it all. And I think the last and probably the most significant thing, and what made her such a principled person, was that Kathy was the person who understood that you never accept a win that comes at the expense of another community, because at the end of the day, that's not a win. And so she is someone that has definitely shaped me in the way I do things. Another person that I will say the same about people will be Paul and Sheila Wellstone. For those of you who remember, Paul Wellstone was a senator from Minnesota for many years. He actually came to the Senate by him and his wife Sheila literally getting in a bus and driving around the state and meeting people and talking about issues. It was a true grassroots campaign. And in the Senate, he was a very progressive voice. He was very principled. And I remember his last campaign, which was 2002. That year, he took a very, and you have to remember, especially at that moment, courageous act of voting against the Iraq War, even though he well knew that that was likely going to cost him his election, because he knew that he still had to vote his conscience and vote with his principles. They died tragically with one of their daughters in a plane crash just before the elections. And when I went to the services here in DC, the quote of his that was on the pamphlet is something that I have kept with me. And what it read was, never separate the lives you live from the words you speak. And so that's the place that I'm coming from today. And that's why I was hoping to have a brief conversation, and because I still have a little organizer in me, a call to action for ADC and for us as a community. You know, I think Abid sort of set it up really well, because I've seen ADC in many iterations over the years. And I know there's been a lot of struggles and opportunities to rebuild, but what I can tell you I've seen lately about ADC is that they have rejoined the fold and re-strengthened their bond with the Leadership Conference. They have been reaching out to other organizations so that when they write a letter asking for justice for Alex Oda, it's not just an ADC letter, it's a letter signed by ADC, by the Leadership Conference, by the NAACP and other organizations. And I know Yolanda seems to be in every meeting I'm ever in, and then some extra ones. I think she's maybe cloned, but really reaching into areas that are beyond what people thought of traditional ADC work, and I think it's critically important, because I think we all know that there's been some missteps. There was a moment where Malik Jendali was disinvited, and it caused a lot of trauma for the organization. I know Abid expertly and deftly and diplomatically tried to keep me from the head table at the Civil Rights Luncheon a few years back when Sheriff Baca was invited to speak. He's someone who, in the face of extreme Islamophobia, said some really great things about why we shouldn't be scapegoating Muslims. The problem was, at the time, his immigration enforcement policies were tearing apart communities and families. The way he treated people in his prisons, he was being sued for his treatment of disabled people in prisons, for guards beating inmates in prisons. He's actually currently under federal indictment, still stemming from those causes. So it was a moment where, when you search a little deeper, as Kathy would teach us, you never accept a win that comes at the expense of another community. And so, in that sense, it's incumbent on us to both search inward and to look outward to see how we can build those bonds and how we can continue to move forward. I know as Arabs, especially as Palestinians, we love to quote Nelson Mandela, and especially when he said this, he said, "But we know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians." And we usually stop there. But there's more to the quote. The rest of the quote says, without resolution of conflicts in East Timor, the Sudan, or other parts of the world. What he was saying and what he knew and what many of us know is that human rights is not a part-time proposition. If you have rights for some, that doesn't mean anything unless everybody has them. And so that's why when I think about us, I know many of us are very moved when we see Syrian and Iraqi refugees hopping on boats and trying to get into Europe, and we're angered by the racism and xenophobia they're met with. And as I've pointed out, we should be so moved when we see women and children coming across the southwestern border of the United States, and we should be equally angered when we see our government putting those families in detention and sometimes deporting them back to their deaths. I think that we can, and many of us were heartbroken when we saw 4 boys shelled on a Gazan beach when they were playing soccer, as children like to do. We should also be heartbroken when we see a child is shot dead by the police while playing in a park near his home, a 12-year-old in Ohio. We are outraged when we see 3 young, bright, aspiring college students shot to death in their homes in North Carolina. We should too be as outraged, as heartbroken, as upset when we see 49 members of the LGBTQ community and their families and their friends gunned down at a nightclub in Orlando. If we want to talk about how the siege of Gaza is denying clean water to Gazans, we need to talk about how the government is promoting a pipeline that may be denying clean water to the Sioux people in Standing Rock. And so at the end of the day, just as we demand accountability and transparency from our government, we need to demand it from our institutions and from ourselves. And it's not that one organization can do everything. Not even Wade Henderson can do everything. Right? If you don't focus, you don't get anything done. But we can understand that it is critically important to work across communities, to work across issues, to offer solidarity and understanding and a larger framing of the issues that we're facing. Because when we think about ourselves as a community, we certainly are doctors, right? My dad and my sister are doctors. We're engineers. We're Emmy Award-winning actors. We are Pulitzer Prize-winning journalists. But we are also lesbian, gay, transgender, bisexual, queer, gender nonconforming. We are disabled. We suffer from mental illness. We are incarcerated. We deal with addiction. We are low-wage workers. We are victims of sexual harassment, sexual assault, and domestic violence. We are undocumented. We are so many things. We are much more than either the caricatures that we see on television or only the best and brightest, which we promote in our community, which is important, but we're so much more than that. Our struggles are intersectional, and they are complex. And that's why when we hear things like Black Lives Matter, or not one more deportation, or fight for 15, or it gets better, these things are not just hashtags. These things are movements that are seeking to bring rights to communities and communities that we intersect with, that we work with, and they are about people. Because at the end of the day, all these things should resonate because there's no difference to a mother in Gaza who loses her child than to a mother in Ohio who loses her child. That woman, that father, that family has lost a child. And so when we understand that, and we move forward on that premise, it's very much like what Fannie Lou Hamer said. Nobody's free until everybody's free. And that's why if we want to get there, we need everybody to get there and to get there with us. I will say that there's, a question of, I understand most of us don't have the privilege that I do, which is to spend my days working on this at an organization like the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, where's Laura? Are you a member? We're going to talk to you after if you're not. But that we don't live in, we don't work in the kind of places where your executive director and your boss will come spend part of a Saturday afternoon listening to you wax poetic to your friends and family. I get that. But there's so many things that we can do on a daily basis. Whether you're business owners and you decide to pay a living wage, you hire people who are formerly incarcerated, you make sure that you have family leave policies and flexibilities so that people can have families and jobs and lives. Many of us do volunteer our time, and in doing so are contributing to this larger goal. But there's also small everyday acts. There is the acts of speaking up when you see something obviously wrong happening, whether you're standing in line at the store, you're riding the metro, or anything else. There is the way that we raise our children and what they understand and what they know, who they know, and how they think about the world. And there's also the acts of how we respond to people when they raise difficult questions of sexual harassment and sexual assault, domestic violence, it is critically important that when people do that they are supported and they are believed, and that we address the problem and not vilify the victims. It is all these things that are going to get us to the place we need to go. Because real change is not the thing that happens when, I'm sitting on a conference call with Greg and 20 other people, or we're sitting in a meeting thinking through a strategy on a piece of legislation. Real change happens when we all make it part of our everyday lives. So thank you again for this recognition. Abid, thank you. I appreciate it very much. And I hope you join me in this journey so we can all get free.